When Margaret saw her 9-year-old daughter begging on her knees to leave the church choir where she'd been singing for 2 years, she could not imagine the horror she would discover about Deacon Robert. Every Wednesday for 4 months, Emily came home from rehearsal with red eyes and a secret that made her shiver. "Mum, it's just a special rehearsal," said the girl in a weak voice, looking away whenever her mother tried to deepen the conversation. What Margaret caught that Thursday night in the rehearsal room of Grace Community Church would shock the entire congregation and forever change the lives of 7 families in Nashville, Tennessee. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back a few weeks and know the story of a mother who learned the hard way that trusting the maternal instinct is not paranoia, it is survival. Margaret Anderson was 42 years old and a single mother since she lost her husband in a car accident 3 years ago. The pain of that loss was still alive, but she had found the strength to move on for Emily's sake. She worked as a nurse on the night shift at Baptist Hospital, one of the largest hospitals in Nashville, and raised her daughter with all the love and protection that a mother can give. The days were long and tiring. She would come home at 7 in the morning after 12 hours on duty, prepare breakfast for Emily, take the girl to school, and only then could she sleep a few hours before starting all over again. But Margaret never complained. That routine, as hard as it was what kept the house running and Emily well taken care of. Emily was 9 years old and a sweet girl, with long brown hair and bright green eyes that resembled her father's. He was a cheerful child, passionate about singing and drawing. From a very young age, she showed a talent for music, humming melodies around the house and inventing songs about everything she saw. When she turned 6, Margaret enrolled her in the children's choir at Grace Community Church, the church they attended every Sunday in the Green Hills neighborhood. Emily fell in love immediately. Singing in the choir became her favorite activity, the one that made her eyes shine with happiness. Grace Community Church was a large red brick church with colored stained glass windows that projected blue and gold lights onto the wooden pews during Sunday mornings. It had a parking lot that was always full, a playground for the children, and a community of more than 500 families. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where mothers chatted in the courtyard after services, and where children ran free while adults drank coffee in the living room. Margaret felt safe there. She felt that this was a second family, a place where Emily could grow up surrounded by solid values and good people. Deacon Robert Miller had been in charge of the music ministry for 12 years. He was 48 years old, tall, with neatly combed grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses that gave him the air of a gentle teacher. He always wore an impeccable suit on Sundays and well-pressed dress shirts during Wednesday rehearsals. He smiled easily at the children and knew each one by name. He had been married to Linda Miller for 25 years, had 3 grown children who had left home, and was known throughout the congregation as a family man, a devoted servant of God, and a pillar of the church. Mothers adored him. They trusted him without any hesitation. In this video, you'll discover how one mother trusted her maternal instinct, even when everyone said she was overreacting. You'll see how small signs, which most would ignore, became the key to saving your daughter and other children from an unimaginable nightmare. You will understand how the courage and determination of a single person can change everything in a matter of hours, and why we should never, under any circumstances, ignore that inner voice that alerts us when something is not right. Every detail here is based on true events that shook an entire community and forever changed child protection policies at dozens of Nashville churches. If you've made it this far, it's because real history interests you. Help this content reach more people who need to hear this message. Leave the like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Margaret has always been a present mother. Even with the heavy shifts at the hospital, she never missed Sunday services, and always took Emily punctually to choir rehearsals on Wednesdays at 6 in the afternoon. No matter how tired she was, no matter how hard she had worked all night without sleep, this commitment to her daughter was sacred. She saw how happy Emily was singing, how music helped her cope with her father's absence, and how the girl had forged solid friendships with other children in the choir. For Margaret, it was more than an extracurricular activity. It was a piece of joy in Emily's life, and she would make any sacrifice to keep that joy alive. Emily loved to sing. His voice was angelic, the kind that makes people turn their heads during hymns in Sunday services. Deacon Robert always praised her talent. Margaret remembered perfectly the first Sunday when Emily sang a solo, a hymn called Amazing Grace. The girl was only 7 years old, and her voice filled the church with a purity that made many people cry. After the service, Deacon Robert looked for Margaret in the parking lot. His daughter has a special gift from God, he said with a warm smile. I would like to work more closely with her, help her develop this talent. Margaret was proud and grateful. It never crossed his mind that those words, apparently so kind, were the beginning of something terrible. Since the age of 6, Emily participated in the children's choir and had never shown any discomfort. On the contrary, she woke up excited on Wednesdays, asked if it was time to go, and came home singing the songs they had rehearsed. Margaret saw it as a sign that she was doing the right things as a mother. Even without her father present, Emily was well, she was happy, she was growing up in a safe and healthy environment. Deacon Robert Miller was beloved by all. When he arrived at rehearsals, the children would run to greet him. He had that relaxed but respectful way. He knew how to make the children laugh during breaks and at the same time maintain the discipline necessary for rehearsals. The other mothers in the church often commented on how dedicated he was. What a blessed man, they said. How many people nowadays would dedicate so much time to teaching music to children for free? He could be doing so many other things, but he chooses to serve here. Margaret agreed with all this. Robert seemed to really love what he did. Everything started to change in mid-September. Margaret remembered the day exactly because it had been just after Emily's birthday, on the 15th of the month. Emily came home from Wednesday's rehearsal, quieter than usual. Margaret was in the kitchen preparing dinner, stirring the spaghetti sauce in the pan while the water boiled for the pasta. She heard the front door open and the sound of Emily's backpack being dropped on the floor of the entrance. Usually the girl would come running to the kitchen, excited, telling about the rehearsal, about who had gone out of tune, about the new song they were learning. But that day there was only silence. "Honey, how was the choir today?" Margaret asked, wiping her hands on her apron and turning to look at her daughter, who had appeared at the kitchen door. "It was good, Mom," Emily replied in a low voice, without looking her mother in the eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the floor, and she nervously fiddled with the straps of her backpack. Deacon Robert said, "I have a special voice, who is very proud of me." Margaret smiled, thinking it was just tiredness. "Of course there is, my love. You sing like a little angel. You're going to wash your hands for dinner, okay?" Emily just nodded and left the kitchen. Margaret stirred the sauce again, but something in that tone of voice, in that way of looking away, made her heart tighten a little that she couldn't explain. It was as if a little bit of ice had touched his spine. She paused for a second, the wooden spoon suspended in the air, trying to make sense of that strange sensation. But he soon reprimanded himself. "What nonsense, Margaret. The girl is just tired. You are working too much, you are seeing problems where there is none." It was only a vague presentiment, almost imperceptible, but that would be the first of many signs that it would take Margaret weeks to finally understand. That night during dinner, she tried to talk to Emily about the shoot, but the girl responded with monosyllables. Yes, no. It was cool. Margaret decided not to press. Children have bad days too, he thought. Tomorrow she will be fine again. But Emily was not well again. In the following weeks, the change became more evident. The girl who had previously jumped for joy every Wednesday morning, reminding her mother about the choir rehearsal at night, now asked to be absent. "Mum, today I have a headache. Can I not go to the choir?" Or, "Mum, I'm feeling sick. I think I'd better stay home today." Or even, "Mum, there's a lot of homework. Can I miss just this once?" Margaret thought it was strange, but she didn't want to force it. She herself knew the pressure of routine and thought that maybe Emily was overwhelmed with school. Maybe it's a phase, she thought as she drove home from work on Thursday mornings. She's growing up, getting more critical of things. It's normal. But a part of her, that same inner voice that had given the first warning, kept whispering that something wasn't right. It was in October that things really got worse. Emily began to have nightmares. The first happened on a Tuesday night. Margaret was fast asleep after a particularly difficult shift at the hospital when she heard screams coming from her daughter's room. She woke up with a start, her heart racing, and ran down the corridor, still dizzy with sleep. When he opened the bedroom door, he found Emily sitting on the bed in a cold sweat, her eyes wide with fear, her little hands clutching the sheet so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Emily, my love, what's wrong?" Margaret turned on the lamp and sat up on the bed, pulling her daughter into her arms. The girl was shaking. "Emily, did you have a nightmare? What did you dream, baby?" Emily snuggled into her mother's chest, but didn't say anything. Her tears wet Margaret's t-shirt. "I don't remember, Mum. I don't remember anything." But Margaret saw the real fear in her daughter's eyes. "I saw that this was not an ordinary nightmare of a child about monsters or witches. It was something different, something deeper and more disturbing. This happened 3 more times that month, always in the middle of the night, always with Emily waking up screaming, sweating, shaking, and always with the same answer when Margaret asked about the dream. "I don't remember, Mom. I don't remember." Margaret began to worry in earnest. She was a nurse, had seen many things in her career, and knew how to recognize signs of trauma. But trauma from what? What was happening to your daughter? One Saturday afternoon, Margaret was folding clothes in the living room while watching the news on television. Emily was in the room doing her homework. Suddenly, Margaret heard her daughter's voice talking on the phone. Emily had been given a simple cell phone on her last birthday, just for emergencies and to talk to her friends at school. Margaret wasn't in the habit of eavesdropping on her daughter's conversations, but something in Emily's voice made her pay attention. "I also don't like it when he calls us special," Emily said softly, almost whispering. Margaret stopped folding her clothes, holding a towel in her hands, completely motionless. "Does he always say that to you too, Sophie?" There was a pause as Emily listened to her friend's response. "I know. I also get uncomfortable. But he said that it is because we are the best in the choir, that God chose us." Margaret felt a chill down her spine that started at the nape of her neck and went down her entire spine. Special. That word again. Why did that word sound so strange coming out of the mouth of a 9-year-old child with that tone of discomfort? And who was he? Who were they talking about? Margaret already knew the answer before she even asked the question in her head. They were talking about Deacon Robert. She stood there for a few seconds, the blood pulsing strongly in her temples, trying to decide what to do. Should I go to the room and ask directly? Should you pretend you didn't hear anything? She chose to wait. 10 minutes later, Emily left the room and came into the living room. Margaret tried to sound casual. "Who were you talking to, baby?" "With Sophie, Mum. She is also from the choir." "Oh, that's cool. What did you talk about?" "Child's matter, Mother. Nothing much." And before Margaret could ask any more questions, Emily hurried back to the room. Margaret stood there in the living room, holding that folded sheet, feeling that something was not right. That feeling of ice on my spine did not go away. On the contrary, it grew, spread throughout her body, became a constant presence in her thoughts. That night, after putting Emily to sleep, Margaret sat up in bed with her laptop open and began researching. He typed phrases such as signs of child abuse and predator behavior in churches. What she read made her feel nauseous. If this revelation is arousing in you a deep curiosity about what really happened, comment right now, "I want more stories," and please leave your like on this video. This message needs to reach more mothers. The first Wednesday in November was the definitive turning point. Margaret remembered every second of that day as if it were etched in fire in her memory. She had come home from the hospital around 7:30 a.m., slept for a few hours, and woke up at 3 p.m. to pick up Emily from school. The girl got into the car silently, with her heavy backpack on her shoulders and a tired expression on her face. "How was school today, love?" "Good, Mom." Margaret tried a few more questions on the way home, but Emily answered only with yes or no. When they got home at 4 in the afternoon, Margaret prepared a snack while Emily supposedly did her homework in the room. At 5:30, Margaret went to tell them that in half an hour they would have to leave for choir rehearsal. That's when it all fell apart. She opened the door to Emily's room and found the little girl sitting on the bed, hugging the teddy bear she had received from her father years ago. Emily looked at her mother with teary eyes. "Margaret, my love, in half an hour we need to go out to the choir, okay?" That's when Emily started crying. They were not silent tears. It was a desperate, loud, painful cry. "Mom, no, please, please don't take me there today." Margaret felt her heart sink into her chest. She ran to the bed and knelt in front of her daughter. "Emily, what's going on?" Emily shook her head hard, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. "Mum, please get me out of the choir. Please, I don't want to sing there anymore. I don't want to go anymore." The girl's voice was choked, broken, and then she did something Margaret would never forget. Emily threw herself on the ground, knelt at her mother's feet, and grabbed her legs tightly, as if she were pleading for her life. Margaret was shocked, terrified, completely lost. She bent down and pulled Emily into her arms, feeling her daughter's small body trembling against hers. "Emily, my love, tell me what happened. Please tell me, did someone hurt you? Has anyone done anything to you? Did Deacon Robert do anything to you?" "No, Mom, it was nothing like that. It's just that I don't want to go anymore. Please, please don't take me." Emily was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. Margaret was confused, desperate. The daughter vehemently denied that anything bad had happened, but that crying was not normal. That despair was too real to be just childish tantrum or irrational fear. That was panic. Pure and genuine panic. "Margaret, it's okay. You won't. You don't have to go to the choir today, all right? You won't, I promise." Emily calmed down little by little, but continued to cling to her mother for almost an hour. That night, Margaret picked up the phone and sent a message to the choir's WhatsApp group, saying that Emily was sick and would not be going to rehearsal. Then she sat on the couch with her sleeping daughter on her lap and stood there, staring at the wall, trying to understand what was happening. His instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong, but everyone in the church loved Deacon Robert. The other children seemed happy. No one complained anymore. Was she the one who was going crazy? Was Emily going through some kind of emotional crisis related to the loss of her father? Margaret decided to talk to other mothers in the church. The following Sunday after the service, she looked for Karen Thompson and Linda Martinez in the parking lot. Karen was the mother of 8-year-old Sophie, and Linda was the mother of 10-year-old Olivia. Both girls participated in the choir with Emily. The three women were chatting near one of the cars when Margaret approached, trying to appear casual. "Hi, girls. Can I talk to you for a minute?" Margaret asked with a forced smile. "Of course, Margaret. How are you?" Karen replied, always friendly. Margaret took a deep breath before speaking. "Look, I wanted to ask you something. Are your daughters enjoying the choir rehearsals? Have you noticed any change in behavior? Something strange?" Karen and Linda exchanged a confused look before answering. "No, my Sophie loves the choir," Karen said, smiling. "Deacon Robert is wonderful with children." "Why? Did something happen?" Linda immediately agreed. "My Olivia comes home singing happily every Wednesday. She can't stop talking about the choir. Margaret, are you worried about something?" Margaret felt her face warm. She didn't know exactly how to explain it without sounding paranoid or accusatory. "It's just that Emily has asked to miss rehearsals. She looks uncomfortable. I just wanted to know if your girls were also feeling something similar." Karen placed her hand on Margaret's shoulder with a comforting gesture. "Margaret, dear, you're too worried. Emily must be alone in a phase of rebellion. Children of this age change their interest quickly. Last week, my Sophie also didn't want to go to the rehearsal because she wanted to watch a cartoon on television." Linda nodded in agreement. "It's true. And after the loss of her father, it's natural for Emily to go through some more difficult emotional phases. Maybe you should talk to a child psychologist." Margaret felt ashamed, as if she were making a storm out of a teacup. Maybe they are right, he thought. Maybe I'm really exaggerating. She thanked the two women and got back in the car, feeling small and silly. But that night, when he went to say goodnight to Emily, something caught his attention. Emily was already asleep, but her head was in a strange position, as if she was using the pillow uncomfortably. Margaret went to adjust her daughter's head when she felt something hard under the pillow. She lifted the pillow carefully and found a crumpled paper, folded several times, hidden there. Margaret picked up the paper with trembling hands. He left the room without making a sound, closed the door, and went to the kitchen, where he turned on the light and unfolded the paper on the table. It was a handwritten note in adult handwriting, neat, on pink paper with decorated borders. Margaret read the words and felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "You are very special. Our secret is ours alone. God has chosen us for something greater. Keep being the beautiful and pure girl that you are. With love, R." Margaret read and reread those words 10, 15, 20 times. Each reading made her heart beat faster, her stomach churn. R. Robert. Deacon Robert had written that for his 9-year-old daughter. Our secret is ours alone. What secret? Why would there be a secret between a 48-year-old man and a 9-year-old girl? God chose us. What did you choose for? If you're here so far, it's because this story is stirring you. What follows will show the exact moment when everything changed. Therefore, at the end of this video, we will reveal the complete outcome with details that few know. Stay with me until the end. The following Wednesday, Margaret made a decision. She was going to take Emily to the choir rehearsal, but this time she wasn't going to leave. I would stay there, watching, waiting, investigating. "Emily, my love, today you're going to the choir, okay?" Margaret said at dinner time, trying to sound firm but gentle at the same time. "Mum, no, please don't." Emily began to protest, but Margaret held her daughter's hands fondly. "I know you don't want to go, but I'll stay there. I'll stay in the parking lot waiting for you. If anything happens, anything that makes you uncomfortable, you leave the room and call me, all right? I'll be there." Emily looked at her mother with startled eyes, but nodded. Margaret packed her daughter, put her backpack on her back, and the two drove to Grace Community Church. It was 6 and 10 in the afternoon when they arrived. The sun was already beginning to set, tinting the sky orange and pink. The parking lot was filled with minivans and family cars. Other children were entering the church, some running, others being dragged away by their hasty parents. Margaret escorted Emily to the door of the rehearsal room on the first floor. "Remember, dear, anything you call me." Emily entered the room, and Margaret returned to the car. But it didn't go away. He parked across the street at a point where he could see the windows on the second floor of the church. He turned off the engine and stood there, waiting, watching, with his cell phone in his hand and his heart beating fast in his chest. The first 40 minutes were normal. Margaret saw the children through the windows of the first-floor rehearsal room. They were standing, singing, Deacon Robert conducting in front. Everything seemed absolutely normal. Margaret began to feel stupid. What am I doing here? They are right. I'm being paranoid. But then, at 6:50, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Deacon Robert left the rehearsal room with 3 girls. Margaret recognized Emily immediately, even from afar. The other 2 were Sophie and Olivia. The deacon led the 3 girls up the stairs to the second floor. Margaret watched as they entered a separate room at the end of the hallway. A small room with only a narrow window, which was at the back of the church. Why only 3 girls? Why that isolated room? The other children continued to rehearse on the first floor. Why did Emily, Sophie, and Olivia need to go to a separate place? Margaret squeezed the steering wheel of the car so hard that her knuckles turned white. His heart was racing. She wanted to get out of the car, run there, open that door. But he was afraid. Fear of being paranoid. Fear of making an unnecessary scene. Fear of humiliating Emily in front of the other children. What if it was really just a special shoot? What if she burst through the door and found nothing but 3 girls singing? Margaret waited. He looked at the clock in the car. 7 hours. 7 and 10, 7:15, 7:25, 30 minutes. The 3 girls were locked in that room with Deacon Robert for 30 minutes. Margaret felt nauseous. Finally, at 7:30, the door opened. The girls left first. Even from a distance, Margaret could see that Emily had red eyes. She quickly went downstairs, grabbed her backpack from the first-floor rehearsal room and ran off into the parking lot. Margaret got out of the car and met Emily halfway. The girl threw herself into her mother's arms without saying anything. Margaret hugged her daughter tightly, feeling her small body trembling slightly against hers. "Let's go home, my love. Let's go home." In the car, during the 15-minute ride to their home in the Belmont neighborhood, Margaret tried to talk. "Emily, what happened up there? What did you do in that room? It's a special rehearsal, Mom," Emily replied in a low voice, looking out the window. "Only for girls with special voices. Deacon Robert said that we are the best in the choir and that we need extra training to sing in the Christmas solo." Margaret felt her stomach turn. "But why do you need to be in a separate room? Why can't they rehearse with the other children?" Emily didn't answer. He just kept looking out the window, his small hands clasped in his lap, his breathing heavy. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that note, those words, that closed room, Emily's crying, the red eyes, the nightmares, the despair. Her motherly instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. But at the same time, she had no hard evidence. I hadn't seen anything bad happening. I hadn't heard anything inappropriate. I had only a presentiment, a sensation, an intuition. But everyone in the church loved Deacon Robert. He was a man of God, married for 25 years, father of 3 grown children, devoted servant for more than a decade. How could she accuse him without evidence? What would she say? That he had a bad feeling, that her daughter didn't want to go to rehearsals, that there was a note with strange words. All this could be explained innocently. The ticket could only be an incentive. Red eyes could be an allergy. The reluctance to go to rehearsals could be a tantrum. What if it was wrong? What if she accused an innocent man and destroyed his reputation for no reason? What if she caused a scandal in the church based only on maternal paranoia? Margaret rolled on her side on the bed, hugging the pillow, feeling the tears burn in her eyes. But what if it was right? What if something terrible was happening to your daughter and she did nothing? What if Emily was asking for help in the only way a 9-year-old can ask for, and she, Margaret, wasn't understanding? Margaret made a decision that early morning at 3:30 a.m., when the house was quiet and the world outside was still dark. She would find out the truth, whatever the cost. It didn't matter what others thought. It didn't matter if she looked crazy. It didn't matter if she was wrong. She needed to know. I needed to be sure, because if she didn't do anything and something was really happening to Emily, she would never forgive herself. The next morning, Thursday, Margaret woke up at 10 o'clock. Emily was already in school. Margaret took out her laptop and began researching. He spent hours reading about signs of child abuse, sexual predator tactics, cases of abuse in churches. Each article he read made his heart sink deeper. Each victim statement seemed to describe exactly what was happening to Emily. Isolation, the secrets, manipulation using religious language, excessive praise, private sessions, the chosen victims. Margaret wrote everything down in a notebook. He made a list of the signs that Emily presented. Change in behavior, reluctance to go to rehearsals, nightmares. "I cry. Secrets. Strange note. Separate sessions from the other children. Red eyes. She looked at that list and felt a chill run through her body. It wasn't paranoia. They were real signs, signs that any professional would recognize. But she needed concrete evidence. I needed something tangible. Margaret thought for hours about what to do. And then he had an idea. She took out her cell phone and accessed an online sales site. He typed spy camera in the search. Dozens of options appeared. Cameras disguised as pens, watches, buttons. Margaret chose a small camera the size of a button, which could be easily sewn into a backpack. Paid for express delivery. He would arrive the next day, Friday. That afternoon, when she went to pick up Emily from school, Margaret tried to talk one more time. "Emily, my love, do you trust Mommy?" "Of course, Mom." "Then tell me what happens in those special rehearsals with Deacon Robert." Emily was silent for a long time. Margaret waited without pressing. Finally, the girl spoke in a voice so low that Margaret could hardly hear. "He says strange things, Mom." "What things, honey?" "That we are special, that God chose us, that we are pure and beautiful. He asks us to sit on his lap while he plays the piano. He keeps running his hand through our hair. He says it's a father's affection, but I don't like it. I want to get out of there, but he says that if I leave, I will disappoint God." Margaret had to stop the car on the side of the road because her hands were shaking so much that she couldn't drive safely. She turned to Emily and held the girl's face with both hands. "Listen to Mom. Deacon Robert does not speak for God. God would never, ever be mad at you for not wanting someone to touch you. Never. You understand? No one has the right to touch you in a way that makes you uncomfortable. No one." Emily began to cry. "But he said it's a secret. That if I tell you, something bad will happen. He said you can die like Daddy died." At that moment, Margaret felt an anger rise inside her like she had never felt in her entire life. It was a cold, calculated, deadly rage. That man was using the death of her husband, the family's grief, to manipulate a 9-year-old child. I was using God. I was using fear. I was using guilt. Margaret hugged her daughter tightly and made a promise right there, inside that car parked on the side of Franklin Road. "I'll protect you, my love. No matter what, I'll protect you, and that man will never lay a finger on you again. Never again." On Friday, the spy camera arrived in the mail. It was really tiny, about the size of a big button, with a barely noticeable lens. Margaret tested it by connecting it to the computer. It worked perfectly. It recorded video and audio with surprising quality. That night, after Emily went to sleep, Margaret sat at the kitchen table with her daughter's backpack, a needle, thread, and the camera. With careful hands, she sewed the camera into the strap of her backpack, camouflaged between the fabric and a decorative label that Emily had pasted there. It was almost invisible. Unless someone was looking specifically, they would never notice. On Saturday and Sunday, Margaret could hardly do anything other than think about what she would do the following Wednesday. She had already decided. He was going to put the camera in Emily's backpack. I was going to record what happened in that room. I would have concrete evidence, and then he would go to the police. It didn't matter the scandal, it didn't matter the reaction of the church, it didn't matter if she was wrong, although she knew in her heart of hearts that she wasn't. On Tuesday night, Margaret barely slept. His body was tense, his mind racing. She mentally reviewed the plan dozens of times. Emily was going to rehearse on Wednesday. The camera would be hidden in the backpack. When Deacon Robert took the girls into the separate room, everything would be recorded. Margaret would have the evidence she needed. On Wednesday morning, Margaret woke Emily with a kiss on the forehead. "Good morning, my love. Today is choir day." Emily grimaced. "Mom, no, I know, honey. I know you don't want to go, but it will be the last rehearsal, I promise. After today, you'll never have to go again if you don't want to, all right? Trust, Mom." Emily looked at her mother with those deep green eyes and nodded. "All right, Mom, I trust you." At 6 in the afternoon, Margaret and Emily were in the car on their way to Grace Community Church. Margaret felt her heart beating so hard that she was sure Emily could hear it. She looked in the rearview mirror at the backpack in the back seat. The camera was there, hidden, ready, on. "Honey, today Mom is going to pick you up a little earlier, okay?" Margaret said as she parked. Emily just nodded. Before the girl got out of the car, Margaret held her hand. "I love you more than anything in this world. You know that, don't you?" Emily smiled for the first time in weeks. "I love you too, Mom." Margaret saw Emily enter the church and then got back in the car. But it didn't go away. He parked in the same parking space as always, across the street from where he could see the windows. 20 minutes later, just like last time, Deacon Robert walked out of the rehearsal room with Emily, Sophie, and Olivia. He took the three to the room on the second floor. Margaret looked at her watch, 6:50. She took a deep breath. The camera was recording. In less than an hour, she would have the evidence she needed. Margaret sat there in the car, her eyes fixed on the window of that room on the second floor. The minutes passed slowly, painfully slowly. 6:55, 7 hours, 7 and 10, 7:15. Every minute seemed like an eternity. Margaret felt her hands sweat, her heart race, her stomach turn. What would be happening inside? What would that man be doing with the girls? At 7:25, something inside Margaret broke. She couldn't stand sitting there waiting, doing nothing. Her daughter was inside. Her 9-year-old daughter was in a closed room with a man she was now absolutely sure was a predator. She couldn't wait any longer. I could no longer rely on a camera. I needed to go there. He needed to see it with his own eyes. She needed to protect her daughter now. Nothing in this story happened by chance. What you are discovering here may be the missing piece to understand everything. Stay until the end, as the most surprising moment is yet to come. Margaret got out of the car with her legs shaking. He crossed the street with quick steps, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath short. He entered Grace Community Church through the main doors. The lobby was empty. In the distance, she heard the voices of the choir children singing on the first floor. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step seeming to weigh a ton. He arrived in the hallway. The door to the room was closed. Margaret put her hand on the doorknob. He took one last deep breath, and then he turned the handle hard and opened the door at once, without knocking, without warning. The scene he saw at that moment would change his life forever. The scene Margaret saw at that moment would make her blood boil in a way she had never experienced in her entire life. Deacon Robert was sitting in an upholstered chair in the corner of the room, and Emily was on his lap. The man's right hand caressed the girl's hair in a completely inappropriate, slow, repetitive way, while the other hand rested on her waist. Sophie and Olivia were sitting on the floor at the foot of the chair, with scared and confused expressions on their faces. There was a musical keyboard against the wall, but no one was playing anything. The light in the room was low, just a lamp in the corner casting orange shadows across the walls. Robert stood up in a sudden movement as the door opened, knocking Emily out of her chair. The girl fell to her knees on the ground with a small scream of fright. The deacon's face was red, his eyes wide. "What are you doing here? This is a private session. You can't enter like that without knocking." He tried to sound authoritarian, indignant, but his voice trembled around the edges. His hands trembled too. He stepped forward, as if trying to block Margaret's view, as if he could somehow undo what she had just seen. But it was too late. Margaret had seen it. I had seen it all. And at that moment, something inside her broke and reconfigured itself at the same time. All the weeks of doubt, all the sleepless nights, all the time she questioned herself if she was being paranoid, all of it disappeared in a single instant. She was right. His instinct was right. That man was exactly what she feared he was. "Take your hand off my daughter!" Margaret screamed, with a force that came from a deep, primal place within her, a place she didn't even know existed. His voice echoed through the small room and spread down the hallway. She ran to Emily, who was still on the ground, kneeling, tears streaming down her face. Margaret pulled her daughter up tightly and placed her behind her, using her own body as a shield. Emily clung to her mother's waist, trembling, sobbing softly. "You are wrong." Deacon Robert raised his hands in a defensive gesture, trying to appear calm, trying to regain control of the situation. "I was just comforting the girls. They were nervous about the Christmas performance that will take place next month. I was just offering pastoral support. You are interpreting everything completely wrong." Margaret was trembling with anger. It was not a tremor of fear or weakness. It was pure, contained fury, energy pulsing through every muscle in his body. She kept Emily behind her and looked directly into Deacon Robert's eyes. "I know what you were doing. I have proof. I recorded everything." Margaret took her phone from her pocket with her free hand, not taking her eyes off the man in front of her. She dialed 911, the emergency number. The call began to call. Deacon Robert's face changed. The mask of indignation fell for a second, and Margaret saw something different behind it. Fear. Panic. He took a step towards her. "No, wait! You don't understand." He reached out as if to take her phone. Margaret took a step back, keeping Emily protected. Sophie and Olivia were still on the floor, hugging each other, crying. "You don't get close to these children ever again. Never again." Margaret's voice echoed down the aisle of the church. 911, what's your emergency?" The voice of the emergency service operator sounded over the phone. Margaret kept her eyes fixed on Deacon Robert as she spoke, clear and firm. "I'm at Grace Community Church in Green Hills. I need you to send the police immediately. I just caught a man abusing underage girls. He's here now. I need urgent help. The address is 2235 Hillsborough Pike. Please come quickly." Deacon Robert turned pale. He looked at the door, as if he were considering running away, but Margaret blocked the only way out. His hands trembled visibly now. "That's a terrible misunderstanding. I am a servant of God. I have been a deacon of this church for 12 years. I have family, I have reputation. You are destroying my life because of a completely wrong interpretation of an innocent situation." Margaret felt Emily squeezing her waist tighter. He felt his daughter's small body trembling against his. He looked at Sophie and Olivia on the floor, those two frightened girls with red eyes and wrinkled clothes. He thought of all the Wednesdays, all the special rehearsals, all the secrets, all the manipulations using the name of God, and something inside her solidified into absolute determination. Innocent? Margaret stepped forward, her voice low but sharp as glass. "You call my daughter special, write notes saying that you have secrets. He takes 3 girls to a locked room away from the other children, put them on your lap. He caresses them, and he uses God to make them afraid to tell their mothers. Do you call that innocent?" Her voice increased in volume. "You used my husband's death to manipulate my daughter. I told her that if she told me anything, I was going to die just like her father. What kind of person does that to a 9-year-old? Deacon Robert opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came out. His hands fell to the sides. He looked at the floor, at the door, anywhere but Margaret. The mask had completely fallen off now. There was no more indignation. There was no more authority. There was only one 48-year-old man being confronted with the truth of what he had done. In the distance, the sound of sirens began to approach. Margaret stood firm at the door, blocking any possible escape. Emily was still clinging to his waist. Margaret placed her free hand on her daughter's head, caressing her hair protectively. "It's over, my love. It's over. You are safe now. Mom's here." The sirens became louder, closer. Margaret heard the sound of car doors slamming in the parking lot, footsteps running through the church, voices shouting locations to each other. 2 police officers appeared in the second-floor hallway, hands in gun holsters, eyes alert. "Ma'am, you called 911, one of them asked, looking from Margaret to Deacon Robert. "Yes, it was me," Margaret answered, her voice now more controlled but still firm. "This man had been abusing these 3 girls for months. I just caught him with my daughter on his lap in this closed room, caressing her inappropriately. I have a camera hidden in my daughter's backpack that recorded what happened here last Wednesdays. I also have a note he wrote to her, talking about secrets and being special. The officers looked at Deacon Robert. One of them stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to step out into the hallway with your hands visible." Deacon Robert looked at the policeman, then at Margaret, then at the girls. For a second it seemed that he was going to try to argue, to try to defend himself. But then his shoulders droop. He left the room with his hands raised, defeated. The second policeman approached Margaret gently. "Ma'am, are these your daughters?" "Just this one," Margaret replied, indicating Emily. "The other two are Sophie and Olivia. Their mothers must be waiting in the parking lot. They were also victims." The officer waved and spoke on the radio strapped to his shoulder, asking for support and child protection services. Margaret knelt down and turned Emily to face her. She held her daughter's face with both hands, wiping the tears with her thumbs. "Look at Mommy, my love, look at me." Emily raised her green eyes, so similar to her father's, full of tears and fear. "It's over. You understand? It's over. That man will never lay a finger on you again. Never again. You're safe. You were always safe with me, but I didn't know what was going on. Now I know. And now it's over." Emily threw herself into her mother's arms, sobbing. Margaret hugged her tightly, feeling her little body trembling against hers, feeling the tears wet her neck. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to control her own emotions. There was time to fall apart later. Now she needed to be strong. It needed to be the rock that Emily needed. Margaret stood up, still holding Emily, and walked over to Sophie and Olivia. He knelt beside them. "Girls, look at me." The two raised their faces in fright. "You didn't do anything wrong. None of this was your fault. Do you understand? Nothing. That man did wrong things, but you are innocent. Your mothers are down there. Let's go down and find them now, okay?" Sophie and Olivia nodded, still hugging each other. Margaret led the three girls down the stairs, followed by the policeman. On the first floor, the church lobby was full of people. Other police officers had arrived. Karen Thompson and Linda Martinez stood there, pale faces, eyes wide. When they saw their daughters coming down the stairs, they ran to them. "Sophie, Olivia, what happened? What's happening?" Margaret looked at the two women, the same ones who days ago had said that she was exaggerating, that she was paranoid. Their voices echoed in Margaret's memory. Emily must be only in one phase. "You're too worried." Margaret felt no anger at them. He felt only a deep sadness. "Deacon Robert was abusing your girls, and mine, for months, in special rehearsals. I just caught him." Karen covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with tears instantly. Linda turned pale as a ghost, her legs weakening. She had to lean on the wall to keep from falling. No, that is not possible. My Olivia would have told me. She tells me everything." Margaret felt a pang of pain in her chest for those women, for those mothers who, like her, only wanted to protect their daughters and were deceived by a skilled predator. "He manipulated them," Margaret said in a soft but firm voice. "He said it was a special secret from God, that if they told, God would be angry. He used their faith against them." Linda collapsed right there, falling to her knees on the church floor, sobbing. Karen was shaking, hugging Sophie so tightly that the girl had trouble breathing. "Mommy, you're hurting me," Sophie said softly. Karen loosened the hug, but did not let go of her daughter. One of the police officers approached the three mothers. "Ladies, we're going to need statements from all of you and from the girls. We've taken the suspect into custody. He's being transported to the station now." Margaret nodded, running her hand through Emily's hair. "We will cooperate with everything you need. Over the next few days, word spread through Grace Community Church like wildfire. Deacon Robert Miller, a respected man, a dedicated servant, who had been a leader of the music ministry for 12 years, had been arrested on charges of child molestation. The congregation went into shock. Many refused to believe it. How is this possible? He was such a good man. There must be some deception. But when the police presented the evidence, the hidden camera recordings, the testimonies of the three girls, the notes found, there was no longer any denying it. Margaret spent that first week giving interviews to the police, the social workers, the detectives. She showed the note she had found under Emily's pillow. He showed the camera recordings. He told about the changes in behavior, the nightmares, the crying, the desperate plea. Every detail was documented, analyzed, used to build the case against Robert Miller. And then, something Margaret didn't expect happened. More families began to appear. A mother named Patricia Morris approached the police saying that her 8-year-old daughter, Emma, also attended special rehearsals a few months ago before they moved to another neighborhood. Emma had changed completely after that. She had nightmares for months, but Patricia hadn't connected the dots until she saw the news on television. Another mother, Jennifer Baker, said her 10-year-old daughter Chloe had also been chosen for the special rehearsals. Jennifer had found it strange at the time, but Deacon Robert was so respected that she didn't question it. At the end of the investigation, 7 girls in total were identified as victims. 7 girls between 8 and 10 years old, all daughters of single mothers or widows, all manipulated with religious language, all threatened that something bad would happen if they told the secret. The pattern was clear and calculated. Robert Miller was not a man who had made a mistake. It was a predator who had carefully selected his victims, built trusting relationships with them and their families, and then abused that trust in the worst possible way. Margaret sat down at the police station on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after she was caught, talking to Detective Sarah Chen, an Asian-American woman of about 35 with a gentle but professional look. "Mrs. Anderson," the detective said, flipping through the pages of a report, "I want you to know that your actions likely saved not just your daughter, but several other children from continued abuse. What you did took incredible courage." Margaret felt the tears burn in her eyes. She had spent the last few days in shock, running on autopilot, taking care of Emily, giving interviews, signing documents. "I hadn't had time to really process everything. I should have realized it sooner," she said in a choked voice. "I should have trusted my gut sooner. My daughter suffered for weeks because I doubted myself." Detective Chen leaned forward, her eyes serious but compassionate. "Mrs. Anderson, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. You noticed the signs, investigated when everyone said you were wrong, gathered evidence and took action. Most mothers never notice. And when he realizes, he is afraid to act. You didn't. You protected your daughter." The detective paused before continuing. "Predators like Robert Miller are extremely skilled. They spend years building impeccable reputations just so that no one suspects them. You are not to blame for taking the time to realize. The important thing is that you noticed." That night, Margaret returned home to find Emily sitting in the living room watching cartoons on television. The girl was calmer in the last few days, but still woke up with nightmares every night. Margaret had made an appointment with a child psychologist who specializes in trauma for the following week. She sat next to her daughter on the couch. Emily paused the drawing and looked at her mother. "Mommy," Margaret began, choosing the words carefully, "I need you to know one very important thing. What Deacon Robert did to you was not your fault. None of this was his fault, you understand?" Emily bit her lower lip, her green eyes filling with tears. "But I didn't tell you before. I kept it a secret. I disobeyed." Margaret pulled her daughter into her arms, hugging her tightly. "No, my love, you didn't disobey. You were afraid. That man used God, used Daddy, used everything you love to make you afraid to speak. But now you've spoken. And because of that, you're safe. And other girls are also safe. You were very, very brave." Emily began to cry, and Margaret held her, shaking gently, whispering words of comfort until the sobs subsided. "If you're here, it's because this story deserves to be heard. I believe that what comes next will surprise you even more. Don't leave this video before you find out how it all ended. The police investigation lasted 3 months. During this time, Margaret became something of a focal point for the other mothers. They met once a week at Karen's house, drank coffee, talked, cried together, shared the difficulties of helping their daughters recover. Margaret never imagined she would become a leader of a support group for mothers of abused children, but life sometimes puts us in roles we would never choose. Patricia, Emma's mother, arrived at one of the meetings with her eyes swollen from crying. "I feel so guilty," she said, her voice trembling. "Emma tried to tell me. Months ago she said that Deacon Robert gave hugs too tightly, and I just laughed. I thought she was being dramatic. If I had paid attention." Margaret placed her hand on Patricia's hand. "We all feel guilt. But it's his fault, not ours. He spent years building trust, years of making everyone believe that he was a holy and dedicated man. He knew exactly what he was doing." The other mothers nodded in agreement, though Margaret could see in their faces the same guilt, the same torturous question. "Why didn't I notice sooner?" Jennifer, Chloe's mother, wiped away her tears with a napkin. "My daughter is in therapy 3 times a week. She doesn't want to go to church anymore. He says he's afraid of God." Linda agreed. Olivia too. "She thinks God is mad at her for telling her the secret. No matter how many times I say it's not true, she doesn't believe it." Margaret felt her heart tighten. Emily had the same fears. The psychologist had explained that religious manipulation was particularly difficult to undo because it touched on deep-seated beliefs that children had developed from a very young age. It would take time, patience, consistent love, but they would recover. The doctor had been clear about this. With the right support, children are resilient. They heal themselves. In February, 3 months after the flagrante delicto, the case finally went to trial. Margaret was nervous on the morning of the hearing. She had been called to testify. So did Emily, even though the judge had allowed her testimony to be videotaped in a separate room, away from the intimidating presence of the courtroom. Margaret wore a navy blue suit, tied her hair in a bun, and drove to the Davidson County Courthouse in Nashville. The courtroom was full. Margaret recognized many people from Grace Community Church. Some looked at her with gratitude. Others averted their eyes, still unable to fully process what had happened. Deacon Robert's wife, Linda Miller, sat in the back, her face pale and thin. Margaret felt a pang of compassion for this woman. Linda was also a victim, in a different way. His world had fallen apart. Their 25-year marriage was a lie. The man with whom she had raised 3 children was a predator. The district attorney, a tall man in his 50s named Daniel Foster, called Margaret to the witness stand. "Mrs. Anderson, can you tell the court what prompted you to investigate Mr. Miller?" Margaret took a deep breath and began to tell the story. He talked about Emily's change in behavior, the nightmares, the refusal to go to rehearsals, the hidden ticket, the desperate plea, every detail, every moment of doubt, every decision I had made. "And what did you see when you opened that door on the night of November 9th? The prosecutor asked. Margaret looked directly at Robert Miller, sitting next to her defense attorney. He avoided her gaze. "I saw the defendant sitting in a chair with my 9-year-old daughter on his lap. He was stroking her hair inappropriately. The other 2 girls were on the floor with frightened expressions. The light was low. There was no music playing. It was not a rehearsal. It was abuse." The defense attorney tried to deconstruct his testimony during cross-examination. "Mrs. Anderson, is it not true that you were under extreme stress at that period? Working night shifts, raising a daughter alone, still mourning the loss of her husband. Is it not possible that you have misinterpreted a perfectly innocent situation?" Margaret kept her cool. "I didn't misinterpret it. I have video recordings of what was happening in that room. I have notes written by the defendant. I have testimonies from 7 different girls who tell consistent stories. It was not an interpretation, it was reality." The trial lasted 2 weeks. One by one, the mothers testified. One by one, the girls told their stories in recorded videos that were played in court. Each report was consistent. Deacon Robert said they were special, that God had chosen them, that special rehearsals were their privilege, that it was a sacred secret. He touched them in ways that made them uncomfortable. He asked them to sit on his lap. He caressed her hair, her faces, her arms. He said it was God's love, pure love, but the girls felt it was wrong. Experts in child psychology testified about the behavior patterns of sexual predators. Digital investigators presented evidence that Robert Miller had researched online on how to manipulate children without leaving physical evidence. The defense tried to argue that everything was a misunderstanding, that Robert was an affectionate man, and his demonstrations of affection were paternal and innocent, but the evidence was overwhelming. On the last day of the trial, before the jury retired to deliberate, prosecutor Daniel Foster made his closing argument. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, walking before them, "this case is about a man who used his position of trust in a religious community to abuse vulnerable children for years. He chose girls from single-parent families, girls without parents, girls who were more vulnerable to male authority figures. He built relationships with his mothers, he gained confidence, and then he abused that trust in the worst possible way." Foster paused, letting his words resonate. And it could have continued for more years if it weren't for the courage of a mother. Margaret Anderson trusted her gut when everyone said she was wrong. He investigated when everyone said he was exaggerating, and he acted when he discovered the truth. Because of her, 7 girls are safe today. Because of her, this predator was stopped. The prosecutor looked directly at the jury. "I ask you to find the defendant guilty of all charges, because he is guilty, and these children deserve justice." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Robert Miller would be sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. When the sentence was read, Margaret heard sobs throughout the courtroom. Linda Miller ran away, unable to stay. Some of the mothers hugged each other, crying with relief. Margaret just closed her eyes and took a deep breath for the first time in months. After the trial, Margaret and the other mothers held a press conference on the steps of the courtroom. Reporters from several Nashville stations were there with cameras and microphones. "Mrs. Anderson, what do you want to say to other mothers who may be in similar situations?" a reporter asked, extending the microphone. Margaret looked directly into the camera. "Trust your gut. If something seems wrong with your child, investigate. It doesn't matter who the suspect is. It doesn't matter what position she holds. It doesn't matter how many people defend that person. If your child is scared, if he is changing his behavior, if he is having nightmares, listen. Believe me, act. Because predators don't have the face of a monster. They look like normal people, respected people, and they count on the fact that no one will suspect them." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Margaret's story spread beyond Nashville. National broadcasters got in touch. She was invited to television programs, to give lectures at conferences on child protection. At first, Margaret hesitated. She didn't want exposure. "I didn't want to be a celebrity." She just wanted her daughter to recover and return to normal life. But then he realized he had a platform he could use for good. How many other children were in similar situations at that very moment? How many other mothers were doubting their instincts, thinking they were being paranoid? If telling her story could help even a single child, it was worth it. Margaret began giving talks in churches, schools, and community organizations about signs of child abuse and the importance of trusting the maternal instinct. She created a small website where mothers could find resources and information. She received hundreds of emails from mothers thanking her, saying that her story had encouraged them to investigate suspicious situations, saying that they had saved their children because of her. Emily continued in therapy. Slowly, very slowly, The girl began to heal. Nightmares decreased in frequency. She smiled more again. There were still difficult days. Days when I didn't want to go to school. Days when I woke up crying. But there were also good days. Days when she sang around the house as she used to. Days when he drew. Days when it was just a 9-year-old girl being a child. Margaret moved Emily to a new church, a smaller congregation called Riverside Fellowship, which had strict child protection policies. No child was ever alone with an adult. All rooms had glass windows. All activities were supervised by at least 2 adults. Margaret made sure to personally check each policy before allowing Emily to participate in any activities. In June, 7 months after the shooting, Margaret and Emily were in the backyard on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Emily stood on the swing that Margaret had installed in the big tree, swaying with her feet stretched out to the sky, laughing as the wind ruffled her hair. Margaret watched her from the terrace, a cup of coffee in her hands, her heart filled with an emotion that was half relief and half gratitude. His daughter was recovering. It would take time. There would be scars. But Emily was safe, she was loved, and she was learning that the world, though dark, also had light, that not all adults were trustworthy, but his mother would always be, that she had a voice, and that voice would be heard. Margaret thought of all the other girls, Sophie, Olivia, Emma, Chloe, and the other 3, all in therapy, all healing at their own pace. Their mothers had become close friends with Margaret, bound together by an experience neither of them would have ever wanted to have, but which somehow created an unbreakable bond. Karen had called her the week before. "Margaret, I just wanted to thank you. If you hadn't trusted your gut, if you hadn't acted, our girls would still be abused. You weren't just brave, you were a hero." Margaret had protested, "I'm not a heroine, I'm just a mother protecting her daughter." But Karen insisted, "You are a hero, and our daughters will grow up knowing that their mothers believed in them, who fought for them. This is a gift that will last a lifetime." Margaret finished her coffee and put the cup aside. He went down the steps of the terrace and walked to the swing. He pushed Emily gently, making her swing higher. The girl screamed with joy, that pure, innocent sound that Margaret had thought she would never hear again. "Higher, Mom! Higher!" Margaret pushed harder, watching her daughter fly into the bright blue June sky, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace. It was not complete peace. There was still pain, there was still anger, there were still times when she woke up in the middle of the night thinking about everything that could have gone wrong. But it was peace enough. It was enough to know that he had done the right thing, that he had protected his daughter, that she had trusted herself when everyone doubted, and in her heart of hearts, Margaret knew she would never doubt that instinct again, that inner voice that whispered when something was wrong. That maternal instinct that had been honed by millions of years of evolution for exactly this purpose, to protect, care, save. Before we continue, help bring real stories to those who really care. If you want to be part of this mission, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. Grace Community Church has undergone sweeping changes in the wake of the scandal. Pastor Williams resigned, acknowledging that he had failed to protect the children of the congregation. A new pastor was hired, a 40-year-old woman named Reverend Thompson, who had worked extensively on child protection policy reforms in churches. It implemented new protocols, criminal background checks for all volunteers, mandatory training on signs of abuse, cameras in all the rooms where children were present. Never again would a child be alone with an adult, under any circumstances. The congregation decreased significantly. Many families left, unable to continue worshipping in a place where such horror had taken place. But those who stayed were determined to rebuild, to create a truly safe space. Margaret visited the church once, months later, at the invitation of Reverend Thompson. It was strange to enter that red brick building again, see the same colored stained glass windows, smell the same smell of polished wood and candles. But it was also liberating. That place no longer had power over her or Emily. Reverend Thompson met her in the lobby. "Mrs. Anderson, thank you for coming. I wanted to personally thank you for what you did. Your courage not only saved these children, but it also forced us to look honestly at our failures as a church. We are different now, better, safer, and it's because of you." Margaret waved, moved. "I hope that other churches will learn from what happened here, that they implement these policies before it is too late." Reverend Thompson agreed. "We are working with other congregations in Nashville to share our new policies. We want the legacy of this horror to be prevention. We want no other child to go through what these girls went through." In September, almost a year after the incident, Margaret was invited to speak at a national conference on child protection in religious organizations. The event took place in Chicago, in a large convention center, with more than 1,000 participants from all over the country. Margaret was nervous as she waited backstage to be called to the stage. She never considered herself a public speaker. It was just a Nashville nurse who had protected her daughter. But when the host said her name and she walked up to the stage, seeing that sea of faces staring at her intently, something changed. Margaret remembered why she was there. It wasn't for glory or recognition. It was for the children, for the Emilys, Sophies, Olivias, Emmas, and Chloes of the world, for those who had been saved and for those who still needed to be saved. Margaret told her story, every detail. The doubts, the fears, the moments when he almost gave up, the ticket, the nightmares, Emily's desperate plea, the decision to install the camera, the confrontation, everything. The room was completely silent. Some people were crying, others took furious notes. They were all absorbed. And at the end, Margaret said something she had learned through it all. Predators count on our silence. They count on our reluctance to believe that respected people can do terrible things. They count on the fact that we will doubt our instincts, we will question our children, we will give the benefit of the doubt. But we have to stop doing that. When a child says something is wrong, even if he doesn't use those exact words, we have to listen, we have to believe, we have to act. The lecture received a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Afterward, Margaret stayed in the lobby answering questions, hugging crying mothers and telling their own stories, distributing information about available resources. A woman of about 50 years old approached with tears streaming down her face. "My granddaughter was abused by her soccer coach 2 years ago. Nobody believed her, not even me. We thought she was seeking attention. He continued abusing other girls for another year until he was finally caught. I carry this guilt every day." Margaret held the woman's hands. "You didn't know. Now you know. Use this pain to help other children. Talk about it. Educate others. Turn your regret into action." The woman nodded, wiping away her tears, and Margaret saw something change in her eyes. Determination. Emily turned 10 in October. Margaret had a small party at home with only a few close friends from Emily's new school. Nothing fancy. Just cake, ice cream, games, and laughter. Emily was happy. He still had difficult moments, but less and less frequent. The psychologist had said that Emily was progressing wonderfully. The girl was learning to process the trauma, to put it in perspective, to not let it define who she was. During the party, while the girls were playing in the backyard, Karen arrived to pick up Sophie. She found Margaret in the kitchen washing dishes. The two had become close friends in recent months. "How are you?" Karen asked, picking up a tea towel to help. Margaret smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Better. Every day a little better." "What about you?" Karen nodded. "Sophie still has occasional nightmares. But she went back to singing. Not in the choir, of course, but at home. This is progress." The two women worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Karen spoke again. "Margaret, I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you've done." Margaret put the last plate on the colander and turned to Karen. "You would have done the same for Sophie. We are mothers. That's what we do." Karen shook her head, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't know if I would have. You were much braver than me." You trusted yourself when everyone else said you were wrong. I don't know if I would have that courage. Margaret thought about it for a moment. It wasn't about courage. It was about not being able to live with myself if I didn't do anything. It was about looking into my daughter's eyes and knowing that I did everything in my power to protect her. Karen wiped away a tear that had escaped. Well, you inspired the rest of us. It showed that it is possible to fight and win. That night, after everyone had left and Emily was sleeping with her new teddy bear that she had received as a gift, Margaret sat on the couch with a cup of tea and a photo album. He flipped through pages of memories, baby Emily in her father's arms, Emily taking her first steps, Emily on her first day of school, Emily singing in the church choir for the first time, that big smile lighting up her face. Margaret stopped at that last photo. It was 2 years ago, first of all. Emily was wearing a white dress, holding a sheet music, standing next to Deacon Robert, who was smiling for the camera. Margaret felt a pang of anger looking at that smiling face, but she didn't let her anger consume her. Instead, it turned the page. The following photos were more recent. Emily on the swing, Emily drawing, Emily blowing out the candles on the birthday cake with that same wide smile. The girl was healing, it was growing, and more importantly, she was safe. Margaret closed the album and looked out the living room window at the silent Belmont Street. The trees swayed gently in the October breeze. The moon shone in the clear sky. It was a quiet, peaceful night. And Margaret, for the first time in a long time, felt completely present in that moment of peace. I wasn't revisiting the past or worried about the future. I was there, in that room, in that house, knowing that I had done everything right, that he had protected what he loved most in the world, and that whatever happened from then on, she would always be sure that when she needed it, when it really mattered, she hadn't failed as a mother. She had not failed. 5 years have passed since that November night when Margaret opened the door to the rehearsal room and changed everything forever. 5 years that transformed not only her life and Emily's, but the lives of 7 entire families, and a community that had to face a devastating truth about itself. Margaret was now standing on the stage of an auditorium in Memphis, Tennessee, at a regional conference on child protection in community organizations. He was 47, a few gray strands beginning to appear in his brown hair, small wrinkles around his eyes that weren't there 5 years ago, but there was something different about her as well. A strength, a confidence, a presence that only comes from someone who went through the fire and emerged on the other side stronger. She looked at the audience of nearly 300 people, educators, religious leaders, concerned parents, and began to speak. Today I want to talk to you about the meaning of the maternal instinct. Not in the romantic sense we see in movies, but in the real, visceral sense of that deep knowledge that dwells within every mother and that warns us when something is wrong with our children. Margaret told her story once again. It never got easier, but it was clearer. Every detail had been polished by repetition. Every lesson had been distilled to its essence. For months she ignored that instinct because everyone around her said she was wrong, because the man in question was respected, because she was afraid of looking crazy. How many of you have felt this? That feeling that something is wrong, but everyone says you're overreacting. Dozens of hands were raised in the audience. Margaret nodded. We live in a society that constantly invalidates the concerns of mothers. We are told that we are overprotective, paranoid, that we see danger where there is none, and sometimes that may even be true, but what about when it is not? And when that instinct is right? The price of ignoring it can be devastating. She paused, letting the words resound. I want you to understand something very important. Predators do not choose victims randomly. They choose strategically. The 7 girls Deacon Robert abused had something in common. All were daughters of single mothers or widows. All were vulnerable. All of them lacked a father figure. He knew exactly what he was doing. built trust with mums first. He became an authority figure, and then he exploited that trust in the most horrible way possible. Margaret saw faces in the audience change expressions. Some people were crying, others furiously took notes, but everyone was paying attention, and my message to you today is this. If you feel like something is wrong, you're probably right. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Not the person's position, not reputation, not how long she's been in the organization. None of this matters more than your child's safety. After the talk, Margaret stayed in the lobby talking to attendees. A woman in her 30s approached, holding a crumpled tissue. I think my son is being abused by his godfather. He changes completely when he knows that the godfather is going to visit. But my husband says I'm being ridiculous, that the godfather has been our friend for 20 years. I don't know what to do. Margaret took hold of the woman's hands and looked directly into her eyes. Trust your gut. Investigate. Protect your child. If you're wrong, the most that will happen is a temporary embarrassment. But if you're right and do nothing, you'll carry that guilt for the rest of your life. The woman nodded, wiping away her tears, and Margaret saw determination creep into her eyes. Emily was now 14 years old, attending the 9th grade at a private school in Nashville. She was a healthy teenager with good grades, a few close friends, and a passion for art that she had discovered in therapy years ago. She still sang, but now just for pleasure, in the shower or while drawing in her room. Music was no longer something that brought pain, but it was also no longer the center of his life as it had been. The relationship between mother and daughter had been transformed through trauma. They were close in a way that few teenage mothers and daughters can be. Emily knew she could talk to her mother about anything, any fear, any worry, any discomfort, and Margaret had learned to listen not only to the words, but also to the silences, the subtle changes in behavior, those little signs that could so easily go unnoticed. On a Thursday afternoon, Margaret was driving Emily home from a routine appointment with the psychologist. The girl was quiet in the passenger seat, looking out the window. "How was the session today?" Margaret asked casually. "It was good. Dr. Chen said I'm making good progress." Margaret smiled. "I'm proud of you, dear. You are much stronger than you realize." Emily turned to look at her mother. "Mommy, can I ask you something?" "Of course, my love. Anything." Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Do you think I would have been able to get through all of this if you hadn't protected me when you did? If you had taken longer? If he had continued?" Margaret felt her heart tighten. It was a difficult question, one she had asked herself hundreds of times. She took a deep breath before answering. "I think you're resilient enough to have gotten over it anyway. But it would have been harder, much more difficult. And I thank you every day for trusting my gut when I did, for having acted when I acted, because it meant you stayed safe. And for a mother, there is nothing more important than that." Emily nodded, processing the words. "Thank you, Mom, for believing in me when I couldn't even tell what was going on, for realizing that something was wrong when I myself was confused." Margaret reached out and shook hands with her daughter. "Always, my love, always." The other 6 girls were also moving on with their lives. Sophie was on the school football team and had discovered a passion for sports. Olivia was learning the piano in an irony that did not go unnoticed by anyone, claiming music through an instrument that had so long been associated with pain. Emma, Chloe, and the others were all in therapy, all progressing at their own pace, all learning that what happened to them didn't define them. The mothers met once a month for dinner. It started as a support group, but evolved into genuine friendships. They laughed together, cried together, shared the difficulties of raising teenagers. The trauma that had brought them together was no longer the only point in common. They were just women, mothers, friends. Karen brought a bottle of wine to the November meeting, exactly 5 years after the bust. The 8 women toasted in Margaret's living room. "What are we toasting to?" Linda asked. Margaret raised her glass. survival, to the cure, and the strength we discovered we had when we needed it most. The others repeated it. Survival, to the cure, by force. Grace Community Church was never the same again, but in some ways that was good. The congregation was smaller now, only 200 families instead of the 500 before, but she was more vigilant, more aware, more committed to the protection of her children. Reverend Thompson had implemented policies that became models for other churches throughout Tennessee. Background check, mandatory training, cameras, constant supervision, and more importantly, a culture where any concern was taken seriously, where no reputation was more important than a child's safety. Margaret visited the church occasionally to give workshops on child protection. It was strange to be in that red brick building, to walk through those corridors, to pass through the door of the room where everything had happened. But it was also powerful. It was a way to take back that space, to transform a place of trauma into a place of teaching and prevention. During one of these workshops, a man in his 60s approached Margaret. "I'm Robert's father," he said in a low voice. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what my son did, for the lives he destroyed. I didn't know. I never suspected it, and I will carry this guilt for the rest of my life." Margaret looked at that man, saw the genuine pain in his eyes, and felt compassion. Her son was an adult responsible for his own choices. "You are not to blame for his crimes. But I thank you for acknowledging the pain you caused." The man waved, his eyes full of tears, and walked away. Robert Miller was serving his 25-year sentence in a state prison 3 hours from Nashville. Margaret never visited him, never wanted to see him again. But she knew from reports from the prison system that he had been placed in a special protection wing because prisoners did not treat convicts of crimes against children well. There was a poetic justice to this. The man who had abused power and trust was now completely powerless, dependent on the protection of the same system that had condemned him. Margaret felt no satisfaction with his suffering. It was not revenge that he sought. It was just justice. The certainty that he could no longer hurt any child, and that certainty was enough. Today, on a December morning, 5 years after that fateful night, Margaret was sitting in her kitchen drinking coffee while Emily finished breakfast before going to school. The girl was excited because she had an art performance that day. "Mummy, will you make it to go?" Emily asked, putting her backpack on her back. "I won't miss it for anything," Margaret replied with a smile. "I'll be there at 2:30. Emily kissed her mother on the cheek and walked out the door. Margaret sat there for a few minutes, watching out the kitchen window as Emily got into a friend's car that was giving her a ride to school. He thought about how life had changed, about how everything could have been different if she hadn't trusted that instinct, if she hadn't acted when she did. And she thought of all the other mothers out there at that very moment, feeling that same chill down her spine, that same inner voice whispering that something isn't right. How many were ignoring? How many were letting others convince them that they were wrong? How many children were at that moment in similar situations, waiting for someone to notice, for someone to act? Margaret picked up the phone and opened her email. There were dozens of messages, mothers from all over the country asking for advice, sharing their stories, thanking them. She responded each one carefully, offering guidance, resources, encouragement. It was unpaid work that she did in her spare time between shifts at the hospital, but it was work that mattered. A message caught his attention. It was from a mother in Portland, Oregon. "I watched your video and recognized the signs on my daughter. I investigated and found that her music teacher was doing exactly what you described. Because of you, I was able to protect my daughter in time. Because of you, that man is now in prison. You saved my daughter." "How can I say thank you?" Margaret felt tears burn in her eyes. He responded quickly, "You don't need to thank me. Just pay it forward, tell your story, help other mothers, and always trust your gut." The answer came almost immediately. "I'm going to do that, I promise." Margaret closed her laptop and finished her coffee. He looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen where years ago he had prepared dinner while Emily came home too quiet from choir rehearsals. That same kitchen where he had unfolded the note and felt the world fall apart. That same kitchen where I had made the decision to fight, to protect, not to give up. And now it was just a kitchen. A place where mother and daughter had breakfast together, where they made plans for the day, where they laughed and talked about normal things like art presentations and math tests. The trauma had not disappeared, but it no longer defined them either. It was part of his story, but it wasn't the whole story. Margaret washed her cup of coffee, grabbed her car keys, and prepared for another day of work at the hospital. But before leaving, he stopped for a moment in the hallway and looked at the pictures on the wall. Emily at age 6, smiling on the first day of the choir. Emily at 9, serious and tired during the difficult months. Emily at 10, starting to smile again. Emily at 12, confident and healed. Emily at 14, strong and beautiful, looking at the camera with eyes that had seen darkness but chose to see light. And Margaret knew with absolute certainty that she had done the right thing, that she had been the mother Emily needed, that she had trusted herself when it mattered most, and that confidence, that instinct, that determination to protect above all else was the greatest gift any mother could give to a child. The unshakable certainty that they would be protected, that they would be believed, that they would never be alone. Robert Miller was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the crimes of child sexual abuse against 7 girls at Grace Community Church in Nashville. During the trial that took place 6 months after the flagrant, Margaret testified courageously alongside the other mothers. She looked straight into the eyes of that man who had hidden behind a servant mask of God and said in a firm voice that echoed throughout the courtroom, "You used the faith of these children against them. You used God's name to hurt them. You used my husband's death to manipulate my daughter into being afraid to speak out. But my mother's instinct was stronger than all her manipulation, and justice has finally arrived." The judge publicly praised Margaret for her courage and determination, saying her action likely saved dozens of other children who might have been victims in the future if he hadn't been stopped when he was. Emily remained in therapy for 2 years after the incident. It was a long and difficult process, with advances and setbacks, good days and bad days. But the girl slowly returned to a genuine smile. She returned to singing, but this time in a different choir at a new church called Riverside Fellowship, where Margaret personally made sure there were strict child protection policies. The relationship between mother and daughter became even stronger through the healing process. Emily learned that she could completely trust her mother, that her voice would always be heard, that her fears would always be taken seriously, and that she would never be alone, no matter what. Margaret became an active advocate for child protection policies in churches and religious organizations, not only in Nashville, but throughout Tennessee and surrounding states. She regularly lectures to parents, educators, and community leaders about signs of abuse, about the importance of trusting maternal instinct, about never giving up when something seems wrong with children. Many mothers come to her in person or by email saying that her story saved their children, that it inspired courage to investigate suspicious situations they were ignoring, that it completely changed the way they view child protection. Grace Community Church has undergone a complete overhaul of its child safety policies. Never again would a child be alone with an adult in a closed room. There would always be cameras working in all areas where children were present. There would always be a minimum of 2 adults supervising any children's activity. Robert Miller's case deeply shook the congregation, but it also opened the eyes of many people to a reality they had preferred to ignore until then. Predators lurk anywhere, including and especially behind pulpits and Bibles, in positions of trust and authority where no one suspects it. Today, 5 years later, Emily is 14 years old and a healthy teenager in the 9th grade. She knows she was a victim, but she doesn't define herself by that. She knows she's been through something terrible, but she also knows she's survived. She knows that her mother fought for her with all her might when she needed it most. And Margaret knows that that instinct that made her investigate, that inner voice that refused to silence, even when everyone said she was exaggerating, that motherly love that is stronger than any fear or doubt or social pressure, saved her daughter and 6 other girls from additional years of abuse. The message that Margaret leaves for all mothers is clear and direct. Trust your gut. If something seems wrong with your child, investigate until you're absolutely sure. It doesn't matter who the suspect is. It doesn't matter what position she occupies in the community. It doesn't matter how many people defend that person or say you're overreacting. Your child's safety is above any reputation, any embarrassment, any fear of being wrong. Because, in the end, it's better to investigate and find out you were wrong than not to investigate and find out too late that you were right. Mothers were not born to be naive or to ignore signs. Mothers were born to be warriors who protect their children above all else. And sometimes a minute of courage can save an entire life. This story does not end here. Margaret's legacy of courage and protection continues to touch lives every day. If you've made it this far, it's because you understand the power of real stories that need to be told. Don't go out yet. Take the next step in this journey by watching the next video on our channel, which will appear here on the screen. In it, we will continue to discover stories that touch the heart and that bring important lessons about family, protection, and maternal love. A big hug, and see you in the next exciting story.